November 27, 1990, 9:55 a.m. In a quiet Surrey parking lot, a Securicor van carries its routine cash collection. Unknown to the van driver, 3 masked men lie in wait. The men approach the van, shotguns raised, ready to unload on anyone that dares stop them. In less than 5 seconds, one of them smashes the van's armored glass. Unknown to these guys, police have been tailing them, and they're about to find out in the most unexpected way. Suddenly, gunfire erupts, and in the melee, one of the men is gunned down while the other 2 are captured. When the masks are peeled off, the notorious Arif brothers are revealed, members of London's most feared crime family, a family that has thrived on violence and intimidation for more than a decade. This is the story of London's most ruthless crime family. But to understand how the Arif crime family has risen to become one of the most feared crime families in London, we have to go back in time to when the roots were first planted. That calls for us to go all the way back to the 1960s, a period when South London was nothing but a patchwork of council estates, narrow high street shops, and crowded flats. This was the perfect environment for new immigrants that had just made their way into the UK to carve out a life in a new land. And it was here that the Arifs first landed after moving from Turkey. Nothing was unique about them. They were just an ordinary Turkish Cypriot family that wanted a life better than they had back in Turkey. In the first years of their stay in the UK, they settled in working-class neighbourhoods along the Old Kent Road and in boroughs south of the Thames. However, if there's one thing that the Arifs knew, they had to adapt to the margins pretty quickly or get swallowed by them. While they may have entered the UK with the hope of getting decent jobs, the reality soon dawned on them. The jobs they hoped would give them better lives proved too hard to get, and life was never any better than how it was back home. It was only a matter of time before the Arif brothers started sliding into a life of crime to make ends meet, and they followed the crime textbook to the letter. They started off with the basics of the Underworld, small hustles, petty theft, and protection money scraped from the pockets of local traders. Within no time, they had learned the rules of the streets. They knew that in this side of the world, one's reputation was the most useful currency. Once you run a smooth knife steal or conduct a high-precision robbery with no violence or blood, you gain street credibility, and that gives you more power. Over time, the Arifs graduated from petty crimes to organized crimes and scams. With each successful robbery or heist the Arifs did, the line between survival and predation blurred even more. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, London's crime scene was changing. For long, the dominant name in this world was the Kray twins, the gang that had mastered the art of combining organized crime with celebrity glamour, mingling with politicians, movie stars, and musicians. However, the law had eventually caught up with them, and they were arrested and convicted of murder. Both would later be sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 30 years. With these twins out of the streets, gaps and new markets emerged. Someone had to carry on with what they were doing. Despite many small criminal cells smelling the opportunity, it is the Arifs that moved fast enough. Within a short time, they had started exploiting the vacuum left by the Kray twins through a mix of old-school intimidation and a canny sense for profitable ventures. They soon started capitalizing on extortion, where they could compel shops, clubs, and bars to pay what they deemed as protection money. They claimed that once paid, no other gang would mess with these businesses. In a few months, extortion turned into a reliable stream for them. According to local business owners, the Arifs had come up with a seamless system where money was delivered to them monthly in cash envelopes, and not voluntarily. They had managed to inflict fear, so much so that no one dared report them to authorities or failed to remit the protection money to them. As the family got deeper into the criminal world, violence became a valuable tool. Stories were told in hushed tones of how the gang tortured its victims, who were mostly members of other gangs, just to assert its dominance in South London. For instance, one of the brothers, Dogan Arif, was said to have been fond of stocking a gun down the mouth of his victims as a way of attracting their attention. There were even unconfirmed rumors that on at least one occasion, he killed a rival gang member in such a manner. Crime experts concurred on one thing. Such anecdotes might have sounded sensational, yet they codified a method that the Arif family had devised: terror, up close. and they did not adopt complex strategies. Instead, they were largely old school: sledgehammers to armored glass, sawn-off shotguns, and the theatrical shock of masks. These were methods that checked all the right boxes in the underworld, intimidate and ensure full compliance without prolonged struggle. By the late 1970s, the Arif name had made its way into the local newspapers, and journalists were already tracking their methods and patterns. However, it was not until 1977 when the name became a subject of national headline news. This is after a security van robbery conducted by the family turned violent. The heist saw men from the Arif gang attack a security van in South London, smashing its armoured windshield with a sledgehammer before unleashing shotgun blasts into the cabin. In that attack, a security guard was killed and about £100,000 stolen. Despite evidence directly linking the family to the crime, some witnesses dropped off from the case, perhaps due to intimidation. In the end, one of the brothers was acquitted on murder charges, while another took a lesser sentence for handling weapons. Needless to say, that outcome did not humble the Arifs. Instead, it emboldened them. The message was clear: the Arifs could also beat the courts, or at least render them impotent through fear and silence. Police records and contemporary reporting from the period that the Arifs started capturing public attention showed two compounding problems that made it challenging for law enforcement to deal with this gang. First, the juries expected to help prosecute them had little concrete evidence. Moreover, there were multiple cases where witnesses either withdrew or vanished, perhaps after being paid off or threatened by the Arifs. When prosecutions failed and the courts either let them free or gave them light sentences, they saw that not as a setback, but as proof that their methods were effective. The justice system, for a time, was a slow-moving instrument against a nimble, family-run organization that understood its vulnerabilities and exploited them fully. It's the reason why their early violent robberies did not lead to immediate decapitation. The family was quick to learn the value of plausible deniability and staked operations through layers of associates. By the early 1980s, the Arifs had made a name for themselves as one of London's most feared gangs. That also gave them the audacity to expand their scope to other activities of the underworld. In short, extortion was just not enough for a gang that notorious. Within a short time, they ventured into the narcotics world, where they created a network for trafficking drugs from Turkey and into the UK. Case in point, in 1999, one of the brothers, Bekir Arif, popularly known as the Duke, was convicted in 1999 for conspiring to supply 100 kilograms of heroin, valued at about £12.5 million. During that time, this case was one of the largest drug cases in Britain. It was revealed that Bekir was central to a sophisticated trafficking network that smuggled narcotics into the UK and other neighbouring countries from Turkey. The court heard that Bekir had structured the entire operation to guarantee high-level efficiency. This included the use of coded communications, well-trained drug mules, and multiple intermediaries. As is always the case with any notorious gang, there must be an avenue to clean the money obtained from every illegal dealing it is involved in, and it was no different for the Arifs. With extortion and drug money piling up, they needed a way to integrate it into the legitimate financial system. One of the most effective ways to do that during that period was through partnering with other individuals and investing heavily in nightclubs, pubs, and property across South London. On a quick look, these businesses appeared ordinary. However, behind that facade, the Arifs had structured them as machines for laundering their proceeds from the sale of drugs and extortion. The family also used these establishments to meet and mingle with influential figures, a move that also reduced any form of suspicion that might have been building concerning their real purpose. More importantly, they helped the Arifs in maintaining control over the local nightlife, and with that control, they were guaranteed of selling more drugs to the revelers. Police investigations later revealed that these legitimate enterprises formed the financial backbone of the Arifs' empire, enabling them to turn illicit profits into untouchable wealth while reinforcing their dominance in London's underworld. By the mid-1980s, the Arif family had become an empire of fear. Now, the next step in their playbook was to consolidate their power, and they did so in the most brutal of ways. The first step in their power consolidation process entailed doubling down on what worked already. As such, they forced more businesses into their protection rackets and punished those that failed to comply. With this move, the margins obtained from extortion increased significantly, and with that, their street influence only grew stronger. But extortion was only part of the equation. The Arifs were also fully aware of the need to rule through fear. They made it clear that anyone who dared to contact the police or speak to investigators would have it rough. Several business owners later reported receiving late-night phone calls warning them that talking to the authorities was not an option, while others were already threatened with kidnapping or worse. Rumours spread through South London's commercial districts that crossing the Arifs could mean a body turning up in the Thames. This climate of intimidation ensured near total silence among the business owners. For them, paying the weekly fee was safer than risking their lives or those of their families. It was a form of street taxation that was not enforced by contracts or law. Instead, enforcement came in the form of whispered warnings and visible violence. The next step in their playbook involved affirming their dominance in South London. They knew that solidifying their position in this area would form a strong foundation for their expansion motives later on. As such, they ensured that their authority within the South London neighbourhood was rarely challenged. Yet they faced massive challenges in their quest to attain that objective. Rival groups such as the notorious Adams crime syndicate in North London and the Bay Basin gang, heavily involved in the narcotics trade, frequently tested their reach. Regardless of that, the Arifs had their eyes set on the ultimate goal, and nothing was going to stop them from attaining that goal. They responded with calculated violence and strategic alliances, further strengthening their grip on the southern boroughs. There were reports of ambushes where members of the Arif family ambushed Bay Basin affiliates and beat them beyond recognition, while in another occasion, a member of a rival gang was shot and left with life-altering injuries. Weeks later, an Adams-linked dealer was found dead in his car riddled with bullets. The message was unmistakable. South London was Arif territory, and those who challenged it would pay in blood, silence, or both. They also trusted only blood relatives or lifelong associates, making it difficult for outsiders to infiltrate and attempt to break it from the inside. For law enforcement, infiltrating the organization proved nearly impossible, and this only made them stronger and practically untouchable. In their quest to consolidate power, they figured out that invisibility was golden. They borrowed a leaf from the Cray twins. That kind of public attention would only make it easier for the law enforcement to build a solid case against them. In light of that, despite swimming in money, they rarely became celebrity gangsters. They ensured that their power was hidden from cameras. They moved in silence and wrapped their dealings in anonymity. Crime experts agree that this kind of dual existence made them powerful in two ways. They could project menace, yet operate under the radar. By the late 1980s, it appeared the Arifs were unstoppable. They had managed to dig their way into legitimate businesses that helped clean their illegitimate money, had sufficient access to drug supplies, and had already cemented their position in the streets through fear, intimidation, and violence. It was evident that they had successfully built a modern crime empire deeply rooted in family ties. This explains why the British media even refer to them as Britain's #1 crime family. Yet even at its height, the Arif empire was still vulnerable, and it would only be a matter of time before someone capitalized on that. Their growing involvement in large-scale heroin importation from Turkey into the UK began drawing increased and unwanted attention from detectives who had long failed to infiltrate their network. In addition to that, rivals were also watching and scheming on how to disrupt the family's well-structured operations. With time, it became apparent that beneath the family's tight-knit facade, paranoia had started creeping in. Trust was thinning by the day, and tempers flaring. And then came the one man reckless enough to challenge their rule head-on, igniting one of London's most violent underworld feuds. By the turn of the decade, tensions between South London's underworld clans had reached a boiling point. The unchecked dominance of the Arif family was at an increased risk, and it was only a matter of time before that was proven. In mid-August 1990, the dynamics changed completely. It all started in a small pub in Walworth known as the Queen Elizabeth, where an extortion attempt by armed men linked to a rival gang occurred. The name of that rival gang? The Brindles. Yet another South London-based crime family that mainly operated around the Walworth, Rotherhithe, and Bermondsey areas. The Brindles and the Arif crime family shared overlapping turf and clashed repeatedly. Back to the club, the Brindle's affiliated men went ahead and even pressed a pistol into the mouth of publican John Daly and a demand for protection, which was basically code for extortion or street taxation. This might have been seen as just another extortion attempt. However, there was a problem. You see, the pub was located right inside the Araf family's South London stronghold, so when news got to the gang's leadership that the Brindles had come to extort money from their turf, that was seen as a direct challenge in their turf. That was an unforgivable move, and the Arafs were about to retaliate in one of the most ruthless ways. It was a moment that shattered the Underworld's unspoken cover of non-interference and provoked a calculated and deadly response from the Arafs, and the Queen Elizabeth incident was just the beginning. 7 months later, in March 1991, the Araf-Brindle feud took a shocking and darker twist. This is after Ahmed Abi Abdullah, a close cousin of the Araf family, was brutally murdered. The story goes that as Abi was walking out of a betting shop in Woolworth, he was confronted by a group of masked men before being shot a few seconds later. Once again, this was a rival gang infiltrating the Araf's turf and, to add insult to injury, murdering a family member. The gang knew one thing: Abi's execution at a place that was supposed to be safe for him would send a negative message throughout the underworld that the Arafs are not untouchable after all. Now, they knew that their reputation was on the line, and they needed to act fast, lest their influence would wane gradually. Nonetheless, the precision and boldness of the hit sent a chilling message across South London. The feud had entered a deadlier phase where every move was designed to humiliate, intimidate, and break the gang. In this world, silence is translated as weakness, and the Arafs were not about to let other gangs get the impression that they were weak. They were going to hit back. And it happened 5 months later. On the evening of the 3rd of August 1991, 3 men stormed into the Bell pub on East Street in Woolworth. Once inside, they wasted no time. They just shouted, "This is for Abi," and went on to unload a hail of bullets. In the chaos, 23-year-old David Brindle lay dead. That name says it all. The young man was a close relative of Tony Brindle, the leader of the Brindle crime family. Apart from David Brindle, this shooting also left a 47-year-old innocent bystander known as Stanley Silk dead. This hit was not only brutal, but also symbolic. It was evident that this was raw vengeance by the Arafs for the March killing of their cousin. With this retaliatory killing, they had cemented a warlike tone in a feud that was quickly spiraling out of control. And once again, despite investigators seeking to mount a solid case, key witnesses either vanished or simply refused to cooperate. In the end, no one was convicted for the Bell Pub murders, leaving the crime a grim reminder of gang terror and the power of fear over justice. Following this string of murders, investigators described Southeast London as more a war zone than a neighborhood. What made this even more worrying is that it had stopped being just a war involving gangs. Instead, innocent people were also starting to get caught in the crossfire. No one was safe, and as long as the feud between the Arafs and the Brindles was still there, everyone in these neighborhoods was practically living on borrowed time. To counter the killings and establish deterrence, authorities charged brothers Anthony Brindle and Patrick Brindle at the Old Bailey with the murder of Ahmed Abi Abdullah. However, the outcome was still similar to that of the Arafs. Key witnesses either refused to testify or withdrew from the case. Reason? Intimidation, threats, and blackmail by the Brindles. By now it was clear that there was a pattern that these gangs leveraged with ruthless determination, that of using violence and intimidation as a tool to sustain silence and shield their underworld dealings. A crucial figure in this feud was Jimmy Moody, a seasoned hitman, professional enforcer, and long-time fugitive that was believed to have been in the Arafs' payroll and whose sole duty was to crush their enemies. Detectives once described him as cold, meticulous, and fearless, and it was easy to see why they described him as so. Previously, he had escaped from HM Prison Brixton in 1980 for his involvement in armed robbery and violent crime, and spent over a decade on the run. It is during this period that the Arafs reportedly hired him for multiple contract killings. Later, investigations linked him to the murder of David Brindle. Now, the fact that Moody had embroiled himself into this war also meant that he was not safe. He was a walking target. And on June 1st, 1993, he was finally shot dead in a Hackney pub in what many believed to be a retaliation from the Brindles. Although he was dead, The rumours that the Arafs had hired him sent shockwaves through London's criminal circles and reinforced the chilling truth. The Arafs' reach extended into the very heart of Britain's organised crime world. If they were prepared to employ someone like Moody, it meant their operations had transcended street-level feuds. They were now running a calculated campaign that entailed high-level strategies. But the Arafs were not going to stay untouchable for long. As time passed, the walls kept closing in, and their fall became a matter of when and not if. The watershed moment arrived on the 27th of November 1990, when brothers Dennis Arif and Mehmet Arif, both heavily armed and wearing disguises, attempted to hijack a cash-filled van from Securicor in Wood Hatch, Surrey. What they did not know was that they were already under the radar of the Metropolitan Police Flying Squad. As soon as they started robbing the van, they were ambushed and gunfire ensued. During that exchange, one of the crew, Kenneth Baker, was shot dead. On the other hand, Mehmet was wounded and promptly arrested. Dennis was also arrested after attempting to escape from the scene. Surprisingly, they had attempted to conceal their identities by donning Ronald Reagan masks. And just like that, in one fell swoop, the Arafs' facade of invulnerability was shattered. Their daring heist-turned-disaster created a decisive legal opening that investigators could now capitalize to finally bring down an organized crime group that had become almost impenetrable. More importantly, it marked the beginning of the end of their stronghold on South London's Underworld. The goose was slowly but surely coming home to roost for the Arafs, when months later, Dennis was sentenced to 22 years and Mehmet to 18. With that blow, their leadership had finally hit the dock. And that was not all. Other senior figures in the gang, such as Bakir, who we already mentioned earlier, also had their date with destiny when they were handed hefty sentences. The family's leadership structure was weakened even further when another patriarch, Dogan Arif, was also jailed for large-scale drug trafficking. With the family suffering such significant blows within a short time, it was evident that it would take decades to rebuild, if it was ever in a position to do so. It was reported that on noticing the weakened structure of the Arafs, other gangs also started infiltrating into its turf with little to no resistance, and this only served to show that the end of the Arif family's life in crime was nigh. It was almost surreal to believe that the fortress of fear this family had built was collapsing at such a rate. And then, in a move that many deemed to be a way of self-preservation, as well as a last-ditch attempt to hold on to their empire, the Arifs seemed to seek help from the most unexpected party, the Brindles. This happened following a marriage between John Brindle and Debbie Arif, in a move that created a direct kinship between the two houses that once killed each other in a quest to assert dominance in South London. With blood now running through both families, it would be easier for the Arifs to concentrate on survival without worrying about a potential confrontation with the Brindles. Yet this union also came as a blessing in disguise for neighbourhood residents. They perceived it as a way of helping to blunt the cycle of public reprisals that had terrorized South London. However, with time, it became clear that the Arifs were well past their glory days, as much of their power had been dismantled in the arrests and convictions of their senior leaders. Though some associates and relatives occasionally appeared in police reports for smaller-scale fraud or narcotics offences, the scale and swagger of the 1980s empire that the family had built had vanished. In addition to that, the Metropolitan Police's renewed focus on organised crime, bolstered by intelligence-sharing units and stronger financial scrutiny, made it increasingly difficult for the family to operate undetected. Every move they made was always in the radar of the authorities, an aspect that made it practically impossible for them to rebuild their crime empire. With this collapse, many of the nightclubs and front businesses that once served as the family's meeting points quietly changed hands and fell into the ownership of emerging gangs. On the other hand, local shop owners that had for years been forced to pay protection began to feel a cautious freedom. A family that once seemed untouchable had eventually been neutralized. Yet there is still a catch in the whole of this story. The thing is, although the Arif Empire is largely crumbled, whispers persist that its influence never truly disappeared. There have been multiple reports which claim that Dogan Arif, even while serving time behind bars, continued to manage aspects of the family's wealth and drug connections using his associates in Turkey. This clearly points to one thing: there is still a shadow of the old power still flickering beneath the surface. These reports only serve to underscore how deeply rooted these organized crime networks are. For the authorities in London and throughout the UK, the message is clear. Vigilance must remain constant, lest the sleeping giant of South London's underworld rise once more. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more interesting videos like this, and we'll see you on the next one.